right, folks, quick intro as always. This clip is insane. Listen, I am not the biggest fan of Candace Owens, but this is probably the most sense I've ever seen her make in any clip I have ever witnessed. She's going to be talking about Israel-Palestine and the weaponization of tragedy. And honestly, her points are extremely valid. So let's get into this clip. Watch as she absolutely dominates this debate and makes the most logical sense that honestly Piers just can't keep up with. So let's get into it.
The larger discussion that's happening right now is whether or not having survived a Holocaust gives you the permission to commit a Holocaust. And for whatever reason, people have been, what I would say, milking the Holocaust narrative in the same way that Black Americans were milking the slavery narrative and essentially saying, like, we lived through this and we survived this. And so now nobody can say that anything we do is wrong. And that's the big issue today, is that we have so many people that will not recognize that it is totally feasible that a Jewish person, and I'm speaking here about Bibi Netanyahu, could do something as horrific as what was done to the Jews throughout World War II or throughout history.
But is that an accurate comparison? I'll tell you why I say that. As we know, I mean, whatever Dan Bilzerian wants people to believe, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Another 6 million people were murdered by Hitler and the Nazis. The numbers of people being killed in Gaza are, in my view, have gone way beyond what is acceptable as a response to October the 7th. However, you're still talking about, at the moment, a death toll of under 50,000. There's no comparison in the amount of dead people compared to the Holocaust. So do you understand why?
But it is a Holocaust, what's happening.
Well, is it though?
Yes.
Well, I think language is really important.
I think language is really important as well, and that's
people
why
say Holocaust, genocide,
I
and so
think
on.
what's happening is a Holocaust. The burning bodies of the children that I'm seeing every day, and we spoke about this a little bit on my show, but I have recognized that the ability to see this stuff every day has transformed my opinion. Maybe the numbers wouldn't have gotten so high if people had spoken up when it was happening at the very beginning during World War II. And so I want to use my platform to say that I believe that they are intentionally executing a Holocaust. I think Bibi Netanyahu, there's tons of evidence. And
all right off the bat, Candace is on freaking fire. She immediately starts off this conversation with a question that nobody else has the guts to ask. And the logic here is undeniable. If someone's entire moral high ground comes from being a victim, does that give them a license to do whatever they want? Imagine someone saying, well, I was mugged once, so now I can rob anyone I please. That's absurd, and Candace is calling it out. She also even referenced slavery, where she basically said it's similar to the idea that Black people get to use the slavery narrative as a reason to justify their actions in the present. She's not saying the Holocaust or slavery weren't horrific. She's saying you can't use those events as a permanent shield against criticism. And Piers, of course, goes for his classic Piers Morgan logic and says the Holocaust was way worse because there was way more dead people. Really, Piers? That's like telling someone, hey, you only broke 2 ribs in the car accident, so quit whining. Human rights aren't a number game, Piers. Atrocities are atrocities, period. And then she goes for the juggler and quite clearly says, I believe that they are intentionally executing a Holocaust. And you can almost see Piers squirming in his seat. She's not playing the diplomatic game, she's naming it for what it is. And here's the thing, whether you agree or not, it's hard to deny that the scale and intent of what's happening in Gaza are horrifying. Candace isn't just throwing out accusations, she's bringing receipts, and you know Piers doesn't have the bandwidth to counter her on this. Crazy start to the clip. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts so far down in the comments, but let's continue.
Obviously, the Western media is not reporting on this, but the corruption trials that are going on with Bibi Netanyahu pertaining to October 7th and him editing the transcripts and the prior knowledge that he knew is now becoming extremely pertinent. It is a question as to whether or not he allowed the attacks to take place, essentially to then be able to go in and to commit this Holocaust against the Palestinians. Now, based on everything that I've looked into and stuff that I had not seen before, because the Western media doesn't cover it, Bibi Netanyahu caught off camera speaking about how he had no intention of following the Abraham Accords and how he was going to get around it. He has, I believe, genocidal ambitions, and that's enough. We don't need to dispute, go backward or forward. Do I think Bibi Netanyahu has genocidal ambitions against the Palestinians? The answer is yes.
Do you think he's a war criminal?
Yes. I believe he's a war criminal, and I think that the issue is how much power he has, particularly in America, and I want to make sure that I'm just crossing, or I guess making that clear to people across the pond. You know, in America, we have lobbying. You guys don't have lobbying here. And so this is why it might seem...
We do, but not to the same degree.
Yes, like AIPAC spent $100 million in our elections. And what that means is that they're able to write fellowships, they're able to pay journalists, they're able to pay people to attack and take down people who speak against their initiatives. And they are, AIPAC, I would say, is very much pro-Likud party, pro-Bibi Netanyahu. And this is why you have seen people like me being attacked in the way that they have been attacked.
Follow the money, folks. This is how everything gets made in Washington, and spoiler alert, it is not pretty. Candace is lifting the veil on the lobbying machine, and it's no wonder politicians tiptoe around this topic. AIPAC throwing millions into elections means they're buying influence, and you'd have to be blind to think that doesn't affect policy. Imagine paying your mechanic $100,000 and then pretending they won't prioritize your car. Please. Candace is calling out the hypocrisy, and it's about time someone did.
For what I believe is just a human stance on what's happening to the Palestinians. I don't care if you had flipped it, if it had not been Israelis, if it had been, you know, if it had been Christians doing this to Muslims, I would say the exact same thing based on the images that I've seen. But there is a ton of evidence that Bibi Netanyahu allowed October 7th to take place, including the things that we found out, because I now read Haaretz daily to
You don't actually think he knew it was going to happen?
Well, let's just talk about the facts. We don't have to speculate on that. What we do know is that they did intercept the hostage plan before it took place, right? The 250 hostages that came out in Haaretz media. We also know that Egypt gave them a warning that the attacks were going to take place. Egypt said that they were being ignored. That was a fact. I've been to Israel. Have you been to Israel? We know it's the size of New Jersey. We know that it takes 15 minutes to get from one end to the other. And we know that every 5 feet, there's a person in your face holding a gun. That attack went on for 2 hours without interruption. I find that hard to believe. And this gets to the, I guess you could say, the nucleus of the corruption trial against him, when now he's even arguing with the IDF minister who he fired, Yoav Gallant, am I saying his last name correctly, where they're saying that some funny stuff happened on October 7th, and they are explicitly accusing him of feeding lies to the Western media. This is crucial. You know, and this could be the undoing of everything. If we find out that he had prior knowledge, and we do know for a fact that he said that he intentionally wanted to take over Palestinian territory, you should find that clip and play it on the show, because it's very significant when he asked the reporter to turn off the camera, and then he starts speaking about his plans for the Palestinians. This was years ago. I think Bibi Netanyahu is a monster, and I think the people that are still standing by him and supporting him, you know, I wouldn't want to have that on my conscience.
Let's turn to the Palestinians, who I think have been appallingly oppressed for many decades. I've made no secret of that. But what Hamas did on behalf of the Palestinian people on October the 7th was an utterly heinous terrorist attack.
Absolutely. No question about it.
So my question would be, let's go back to October the 8th. What should have been Israel's response to that, given the scale of it?
Well, first and foremost, there had to be a response. And we know that the IDF is very capable of a surgical tactical response, because they've done it over the years plenty of times, in which they're able to take out terrorists. We just watched them execute a beeper attack and hit out Hamas terrorists. So this
I think it's a very relevant point, because if they could do that to 3,000 Hezbollah terrorists, why couldn't they be as precise with Hamas?
Because they don't want to be. They want to level it because they want to take it over. And I believe, and you can see this, by the way, in the videos of the settlers dancing. I mean, why do they have settlers already ready? That does not seem strange that this quickly you already have settlers that are going in and taking over the territory, and you're hanging.
Uh-oh, Candace is breaking through the matrix. Let's not kid ourselves. This isn't about security, it's about expansion. When you see settlers moving in before the dust has even settled, it's pretty clear what the real agenda is. It's like someone torching your house and then showing up with a moving van. And the worst part, they dress it up as defense or security measures. But actions speak louder than words. And Candace is exposing a reality that's been swept under the rug for far too long. This isn't collateral damage, it's calculated. And the media, they're too busy running interference, spinning these actions as unavoidable collateral damage. But ask yourself, if they're so concerned about Hamas, why are the bulldozers running in to claim the land instead of focusing purely on the quote-unquote terrorists? It's not defense, it's opportunism. It's a simple question, but I think a very important one to ask.
You know, children's toys.
Well, what should Israel have done, though? What would have been?
They should have just taken out the Hamas terrorists.
How do you do that when they're embedded amongst civilians?
Listen, I'm not an IDF minister, but what I can say is, going back to that beeper attack, it seems pretty precise. And there have been many examples of them doing that in the past. So I just don't buy the BS of like, we actually just have to take down entire towers and buildings. It doesn't even make sense. I mean, I'm not an engineering major, but if you're telling me that there's a tunnel under everywhere, you only have to hit a tunnel at a couple of points to render it completely useless. So the idea that they had to level the entire place plus go out into refugee camps doesn't make any sense. Like I said, I think their goal, and as they do, they have all these policies mowing the lawn, where they kill a certain amount of Palestinians every year. This is genocidal. The aims here are genocidal.
Your father-in-law, very highly well-regarded man in this country, Lord Michael Farmer, he said the Israeli Defense Forces were acting in a highly accountable way in an extremely complex and difficult environment. We cannot forget that they have been forced to prosecute this war. Obviously, a different interpretation of events there. Have you discussed this with him?
Yeah, I mean, I try to separate my politics from his politics because I think it's unfair in any family to say, well, what does your mom think? What does your cousin think? What does my sister think? My sister's a Democrat, What I can say is I deeply respect him. He's done a tremendous amount of work. And I want to say this. I was on the Zionist side. Let's not forget this. For years, I worked for Prager University. I worked for Daily Wire, and so I was much more sympathetic to, I would say, the Zionist cause throughout my entire career. But the difference is, and I think we spoke about this on my podcast, generationally, with the access of social media, being able to see these things every day versus the person who, as you described it, as you are still, because you're kind of a combo, who hears the thud of the newspaper and reads the newspaper and believes that, or, this kind of becomes or colors their worldview, is very different. Social media completely transformed my perspective on what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And I'm disgusted with myself for not being more awake to it.
But that's interesting, because can social media also, can it wrongly skew a narrative? In other words, can it reinforce one view, which is very quickly established? I mean, I was astonished how quickly the narrative after October the 7th became anti-Israel and very pro-Palestinians stroke Hamas in many cases. I found that quite terrifying that was the case, notwithstanding my own view about how Palestinians have been treated before that. But could it be, I mean, you're a very smart person, but you say that you were affected by social media. Social media was incredibly partisan behind the Palestinians almost immediately, to the extent where I would argue, looking back at the whole time, that I've argued persistently, well, what would be proportionate? I can't think of anything Israel could have done, given that Hamas were embedding themselves amongst civilians. I don't know how they could have attacked Hamas without being criticised, whatever they did.
They would have been criticised, but not to this degree. Everyone was expecting a response, and myself included. We're, like you said, and we agree on this, we're way past that. So that's not even a question anymore. There had to have been a response, and you are correct that no matter what, the response would have been criticised. But now there are questions about whether or not, like I said, they allowed this attack to happen, and I think this corruption trial will tell us much more. My instincts are telling me yes, but to go back to your question about whether or not social media can color you the wrong way, for the first time ever, we were just able to see what was happening in Palestine. Before, we just had to rely on legacy media, who has to...
But did you believe all you were seeing?
When I first saw it, I kind of wanted to wait. I was trying to just sort through everything.
Because I'm still not sure all the stuff I see is right.
Well,
it's very
some
hard
of it,
to...
but I'm now getting my information because I ended up signing up for Haaretz in Israeli newspapers because they're protesting it. They're calling this an ethnic
cleansing. I read that
cleansing.
stuff all the time, yeah.
If Israeli newspapers are calling this an ethnic cleansing, why do we not have people in the Western media that have the courage to call it the same? It's clearly not anti-Semitism. Why on earth would Haaretz media or a Haaretz Israeli newspaper be anti-Semitic and want to see the undoing of Jews?
Exactly. Where is the courage? The Israeli media outlets like Haaretz are calling this out for what it is, ethnic cleansing. And these aren't fringe publications. These are respected voices within Israel itself. Yet, here in the West, our media can't seem to find their spines. Why? Because they're too cozy with the establishment, too worried about losing their funding or access. Candace is asking the question that should be on every single person's mind. Why is the truth being filtered? It's almost as if the Western media sees its job as PR for governments rather than holding them accountable. And that's why independent voices like Candace are so important. We need more people who are willing to speak the truth even when it's uncomfortable. And honestly, isn't that what journalism is supposed to be about?
Again, this goes back to AIPAC and back to lobbying. But to answer your question, that piqued my curiosity, and I couldn't believe that essentially everything that I had these presets to believe about Jews, everything was existential. Again, that sort of Holocaust upbringing in my mind culturally, seeing so many Holocaust movies, I kind of had these factory settings where I instantly always wanted to see Jewish people as the victim. And it was very hard for me to kind of shed that and to.
But a lot of Jewish people were victims here too.
Correct, but what I'm saying is my factory.
So it's not wrong for them to play the victim if they're genuinely being victims.
If they're genuinely being victims, correct. But when I say my factory settings, what I mean is that the second a Jewish person got hysterical about anything, I just assumed they were telling the truth and were the victims. I'm just kind of going back and assessing my own character flaws. I got this wrong in my political career. What you should do is not have these factory settings and actually examine the facts, right? And so when I started to do that, what I started noticing was I wasn't even allowed to ask a question. So I'd see something and then I'd say, well, what is this? And then suddenly it was anti-Semitism. And that right there to me signals you're not telling me the truth because you shouldn't have to do that, right? Nobody is going to side.
I think that works in almost every single debate in the world right now. I see it the other way around where you get being accused of being an Islamophobe if you dare to criticize anything on the Palestinian side, even if a lot of the stuff that's been going on is worthy of criticism.
I haven't seen that, and I say this as someone who was deeply critical of people that were Islamic throughout my entire career, because again, I jumped into politics, and there's a certain perspective that you're supposed to have in America about Zionism, and you're supposed to kind of marry yourself to it. And despite all of the things that I now kind of blush when I look back on, that I sort of had those factory settings, they never kind of just like routinely dismissed me. They just kind of were like, well, she's bought and paid for, never called me an Islamophobe, whatever it is. I just want to be fair. And I want to be fair. If something happened tomorrow and in an elite place in America and a bunch of Jews were killed and targeted, I want to stand on my platform and say what is happening to Jewish people is wrong. I'm not married to hating Jews because I think what Bibi Netanyahu is doing is wrong. It has nothing to do with the Jewish people at large. This is a foreign state. He's allowed to be criticized in the same way that I criticize Biden, in the same way that you can criticize Trump. I'm criticizing Bibi Netanyahu, and I think the ICC got it correct in pursuing an arrest against him.
Do you think Hamas are a terrorist organization?
Absolutely.
You do?
If you kill civilians, you're a terrorist organization. That was always very clear.
So could they play any part in the government after all this, in your view?
I would really struggle to see how that would be a plausibility.
I think this is a perfect conclusion to what she's trying to say, and Candace just said what everyone else is too afraid to admit. Whether it's Hamas or the IDF, targeting civilians is terrorism, full stop. I really don't understand how that can even be a question. And this is why people love Candace. She doesn't play favorites. She's calling out both sides for their atrocities, and that's rare in today's hyper-partisan world. And she says things for what they are, which she certainly did in this specific clip. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments below. This was, in my opinion, one of the most exciting and pretty straightforward arguments that anyone could make about this topic. But again, would love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments below. Be sure to give us a like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.